In this video, I'm going to be growing Italian basil, 1 from seed, 2 as a winter microgreen, 3 I'll also be growing Cheats basil, and 4 I'm going to be making a delicious authentic Ligurian pesto. Basil is one of the most delicious herbs on this planet, and it's most known for being made into the delicious Italian pesto like this one I made here. So how do we grow basil? How do we grow enough basil to keep us in pesto all year round? Now, I have been obsessed with basil and pesto since living in the birthplace of pesto for about a year when I was in my 20s. That place is in Liguria, which is the Italian Riviera just outside Genoa on the northwest coast of Italy. So I think I know a thing or two about making pesto. So stick around to the end of the video where I will share with you how I make it. But before we get on to making pesto, we must have basil. So let's grow it. As you can see here, I have plenty sprouting up now. It's mid-July and these should give me a good harvest before the first frosts come. Now, as you can see, mine are still small and they have been slow growing because of the awful summer we are having in the UK this year. It's overcast, cold and wet. So stick with the video where I will also share a shortcut for how to supercharge growing your basil. To grow them from seed, however, you can still do it now. You start by mixing the sand and the compost. I do it about 50-50. I mean, you want to keep the compost open and free draining, and you also want to pre-moisten it. I use obviously my foil trays. I have a video on that, I'll link below, and then you sow the seeds on the surface and sort of smush them in with your finger. It's all very simple. You need to keep an eye on watering, so I put them in a bain-marie kind of situation and I just bottom water before it all dries out. Keep it nice and moist but not soaking wet. In July, you don't need to keep them in a greenhouse like mine because it's warm enough outside. But since we are having this unusually cool, wet, windy summer here in the southeast of England, I have decided to keep them on my DIY hotbed. It's not switched on, but because the sand does in fact deter slugs, which have been just so many this year, they've destroyed quite a few plants. Also, they're just tidier in here, and I keep all my seedlings in here just for convenience for watering, etc. But of course, you can grow them outside, absolutely. Now, if you're lucky enough to be in a zone 10 or more, you can grow basil all year round as a short-lived perennial, although you still must avoid them getting frost damage. So you probably, even in these zones, you're probably going to have to provide them with some protection during the winter months, possibly grow them indoors on a sunny window ledge. For the rest of us, you can grow basil year round as an annual, and in winter you can grow it indoors. You will need warm heated seed mats and lights. I do have a video on my grow lights and my setup, which I will also link in the video in the description below. I find larger plants difficult to keep going in the winter here in the UK, so an option if you want to grow basil all year round is to grow it as microgreens. They're just as tasty, but of course they just won't grow into mature plants. So you will harvest them, of course, much earlier. To sow them as microgreens, you just sow them the same as above, but more densely, so that almost the entire soil surface is covered with seeds. Because you won't be growing them to large plants, they have more than enough space and room and nutrients to grow them to the microgreen harvest stage. To harvest them as microgreens, you have to just wait until they have true leaves, not the baby leaves you see here, but actual true basil leaves that are scented and fragrant, just like the grown-up plant. If you want, you can transplant a few to grow onto larger plants and trial it under lights in the winter and see how you get on. I find it's too slow growing, so I just cut my losses and grow them as microgreens. As basil is growing, this is more generally for all, whichever way you grow your basil, whether you do it as microgreens in winter or in the greenhouse like me, it does like watering. Basil pesto originates from Genoa, northwest Italy in Liguria, which is a coastal and mountainous area known for being hot, humid and also wet. Basil grows richly and sweet in this area, hence the beautiful sweet pesto that is produced. So make sure you water your basil. But as with most plants, it doesn't want to stand in water, hence the need for well-drained soil. If you are growing basil to make pesto or add to pizza and other pasta recipes, make sure you buy Italian basil, not Asian basil. If you're growing it from seed, look out for Basil Genovese seeds. These are specifically the seeds for growing that lovely, pungent authentic Italian pesto, Basil Genovese. Okay, so what was the shortcut I mentioned in the video? Well, quite simply, it is to use store-bought basil to bring on at home. When you buy store-bought basil, it isn't just one plant. They're sown densely, like I just explained in the microgreens, but they're allowed to get tall and leggy. It looks like one bushy plant, but in fact, it's many very thin, leggy plants. However, they are pretty healthy for a limited time. They will die once you start harvesting from them if they are not transplanted and given more space. As you can see here, I have separated out 30 basil plants from one pot. Instead of using one pot for pesto, I want to turn these plants into bigger, bushier plants so I can make enough pesto to jar and freeze, which will last me all year. When you think one of these pots is £1.70 and it produced 30 separate plants that are already well started, I mean, that is a lot of time and effort saved my end. For 30 plants I can just bring on at home. I think probably I'll save money doing them this way than actually growing them from seed. So to plant them out, I use the same compost mix as before, maybe slightly greater quantity of compost to sand, though not too much because I still want good drainage. Then I pot them on, I plant them deeply, so do get a deep pot so the roots can grow deeply. I want to encourage more root growth and bushiness, so I plant that leggy stem down into the compost as well. I want the plant to be bushier. And I want it to be able to withstand, wind and things like that without breaking, because their stems are pretty fragile. It's actually easier to transplant them into pre-moistened soil as they will hold their position better than in dry soil. So do water it first, it's just easier. But you can also water it again afterwards just to be on the safe side, and I do that as well. Don't be tempted to revive a reduced supermarket basil with dying leaves. Once basil starts to die, it's pretty hard to revive. Cost cutting at this stage will end up wasting you money, so just buy the best specimen in the store to transplant at home. Then once they're all planted up, I'm going to pinch out the tips. I want these tips to make my basil pesto. By pinching out the tips, I will encourage this lateral growth, which should result in bushier and bushier plants. A bushier plant means more tips to pinch out to make an even more bushy plant and to make more basil pesto. Don't be tempted to cut the whole basil plant, as this will just result in killing the plant. So you're actually better off buying several pots. This is what I tend to do, about £10 worth. I buy them all, I pot them all up, and then I pinch out the tips. So I can make my pesto today, but instead of this pot of basil dying, these plants will now continue to grow on until I want to make more pesto later, rather than having to go back to the shop and buy even more basil. Also, in the meantime, I've got my own sown basil growing as well. Alright, so let's end this video with how do you make the pesto. I'm going to make the classic Ligurian pesto. This is where I first tasted Italian pesto that wasn't out of some jar from the supermarket, and it blew my mind how good it was, and so I've been making it ever since. So you need 100 grams of pine nuts, 150 grams or thereabouts of grated parmesan. A lot of this stuff is eyeballing and to taste, so you can vary the quantities, depending. You don't have to be dogmatic about it. 100 to 150 millilitres extra virgin olive oil. Has to be good quality, fresh, not the stuff at the back of the cupboard you've had since 3 Christmases ago. Don't use that. And a good quantity of basil leaves, and you can see the quantity here on this plate. There is some debate about whether to add garlic or not. I have seen some Ligurians add 1 small clove of garlic while others leave it out. Whilst I am a garlic lover, I actually do tend to leave it out. If the basil and the parmesan are top quality, the garlic tends to spoil the flavour in my view. I love garlic, but I do like my pesto to taste fresh and clean. But you can certainly pound in a clove of garlic if you like. You do not need salt and pepper, as a good Parmesan will be well enough seasoned that you do not need to add any more. And pepper is not a classic flavouring for this pesto anyway. Now you can pound them together in a pestle and mortar, but I tend to use a blender. This is a NutriBullet blender. The idea is not to make a puree though. So to avoid that, we have to take some simple steps with the ingredients before they go into the blender. And that is really to grate the cheese and mix all the ingredients in the blender first before you switch the machine on. Then you pulse only for 1 or 2 seconds at a time before stirring the ingredients again until you get this wonderfully textured classic pesto that has a really sweet and spicy flavour and really will play havoc with your taste buds in a good way. I also have a vegan version of this pesto, which is also actually a classic Ligurian recipe, so it's not some baddie recipe with weird fake ingredients. It's actually a classic Ligurian recipe for when they were poor. This is how they made it. Just as tasty, but without the Parmesan. So go to visit my website for that. I also give you on my website some ideas for how to store, jar and freeze your pesto for use so that you can have it all year round. Anyway, I hope that video helped. I hope it helps you to grow your own pesto, basil, and make your own pesto, grow your own, just be more self-sufficient, get back to tasting real flavours again, and, become an Italian like me. No, I'm not. I wish I was. I do think about living in Italy quite a lot. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe. Click the notification button so you know when I'm going to post more videos. Like it and share it with your friends. And don't forget to visit my website for more information at www.jillbrotherton.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.